I think this is a really good segue to our final session on building, designing, and drawing, individual and collaborative practices. So we have six speakers in this session, and they are all equally and amazingly inspiring, like all the other speakers earlier. This session will focus collectively on those women pursuing private architectural practice, both as individuals and also in collaborative partnerships. So from honing their skills to establishing an office, and from shaping a professional design identity to sustaining a practice, women architects face multiple challenges, of course men too, but with regard to authorship, specifically, empowerment, exercising authority, and negotiating different economies of time, emotions, energy. So without further ado, I'm gonna first introduce our first pair. Joan Leong, who has since become also a friend and someone I love talking to, is founder and managing director of Lotus Architects. And has won a number of design competitions, primarily the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and the revitalization, and also the revitalization of the Western market. She's deeply engaged in architectural practice, community work, and academia, and an active proponent of architectural education. I would like to point out that in the 2000s, she set up the Professor Eric Lai Architectural Education Fund, and later the annual Eric Lai Memorial Traveling Scholarship. She has many more accolades. You can see that in the bulletin. Quickly, I'm going to introduce Koon, my wonderful partner and collaborator, and also assistant professor in the Department of Architecture at the University of Hong Kong, and founding director of really productive program called Cities in Asia, and a founding principal of Skill Collaborative, which we co-founded over 10 years ago. And so over to you, Joan and
All right, thank you.
Is this working?
Yeah, this is working. Big thank you for the introduction. We have, what a privilege, I think, to be able to get up close in this conversational style and to go deeper. I hope that we will glean from Joan this, the insights of being in a period of architectural development, I would say. I want to sort of suggest that some of the formative influences in Joan, in your time, it's really also a lesson in architectural history itself, in the sense that in the early years of your education, the influences and the factors affecting your decision to be an architect, there was an incredible story there. To say that really in the 70s, there was a kind of, you're really at a crossroad, not only in your life, but also the crossroad of architecture, where there were a lot of attitudes against modernism. That is, the evolving ideas of late modernism, very pluralistic styles were evolving. There's the British high tech, and then there's postmodernism and so on. And the rebellion was sort of in the air. And I think you took to that kind of spirit very, very well. Would you enlighten us, speak to that kind of formative influences?
Well, as you're speaking, or in fact, this is not a topic that has been current in my mind, but this event came about, and I was in dialogue with Shelley, with yourself, and with your good wife, Eunice. And it occurred to me that, in fact, yes, I was living through that momentous time. And it happened to coincide with my innate character. This rebellion against the establishment, in fact, I felt very strongly since I was in primary school. As a child, I loved learning, and I think that was ignited by my oldest brother, who's a very creative person. When we were all preschool age, he created these mock classes at home, and I absolutely loved them. I learned so much from him. And the moment I got into kindergarten, I was a top student. So I just leaped and bound into primary school, and after the first week of school, I thought, oh my God, it's going to be so boring. Everything is a straitjacket. Everybody has to sit in line and in the prescribed classroom and go through the prescribed classes. So I plummeted from being the top student to pretty much the bottom by the time I left the school. And it's really quite by accident that I became an architect. My father is a very conventional Chinese man. He believed, as the earlier discussion about men's toilet being only available in a public place, he certainly subscribed to that formula. And his girls were not going to get any higher education. They would just be happily married off, and that's the best thing for their life. Lo and behold, 1967, Hong Kong went through a very difficult time, riots everywhere, and my father was a refugee from China. He knew what it was like to bring a family to safety from a hazardous situation. He has 9 children, so he felt that he better dispense the family around the world out of Hong Kong quickly. The alternative for the children, for the girls to leave, by that time my brothers were already studying in England, for the girls to leave Hong Kong, the only way is to get a student visa to study abroad. So I ended up in England. I've always, as a child, liked drawing and liked designing this and that at home. So I thought, well, an alternative would be to go into interior design. My brothers were already in university in England, and he said, what nonsense. Girls go to university in England, so you go to university, and you study architecture if you like design. You can always do whatever design you like eventually. So then my mind was set to study architecture. But then my sister got me into a grammar school for girls in Manchester, and I was the one and only overseas student. My English was appalling at the time, being straight from Hong Kong, and I was in Manchester, the place my father picked for me because it's a nice and safe city, no partying. So nobody understood what I'm saying when I speak English, nor could I understand them because they speak Northern English. Tough time. So my form teacher, as well as the headmistress, would talk to me every day to tell me, Joan, you don't understand. University standards are very high in England, and for a woman student to want to be an architect, you're really dreaming. So maybe consider teaching or nursing. My classmates from St. Paul's School at the time, a lot of them went to England to become nurses or to go to nursing school. So that was the track. But I wasn't going to tell my brother I'm not going to be able to make it university because he was going to university. I'm no less than he is. And so I was determined. From an art stream in Hong Kong, I have no science subjects, and to go to university, I need at least one science subject or mathematics. I mean, thinking back, I don't know what overcame me. I was so determined. I went to the next town to go to evening classes to teach myself mathematics. And I got top grades. So that my headmistress saw my determination to take the public exams in math. She says, no, we give you classes. So you take mathematics within the school. Then the next hurdle was to find a university that would accept me. It's tough because I simply don't have the academic qualification nor a portfolio. But then I was in Manchester. The least I can do is to go and talk to the professor to see what chances there are. So I went for an interview, and the professor says, you're absolutely right. You have absolutely no qualification that we would require. I went with a yellow envelope with A4 size drawings, which was all I managed to make within the space of time I had. And he said, when you go out of my room, go and have a look at the portfolios that the other candidates have with them. But we had a long chat, and I have to say I give him credit. He said, but I find you a very intelligent lady, and you obviously have prepared yourself very well. I'm convinced that you understand what architecture means, and I'm going to give you a chance. Just give me some medium grades, and I'll be happy to take you. But of course, I got very good grades, and I sailed in. And in the first year, I already was one of the top 4 students in a class of 40, when they only have 4 women students. I have to say, one really inspiring teacher I ran into was Essie Beniazat, who had become Dean of School of Architecture in Chinese U. He spotted me, my passion. Apparently, they run IQ tests for all the students, and I scored very high. So he took a liking to me and gave me attention. Not that he would be kind to me or anything, but he took it upon me to look at my work, pay attention to my work, and challenge me. When I have a model in the studio, I remember in the first year, and I was quite pleased with what I was doing, and he said, why is the building like that? And I said, well, because the site is in the middle of the lawn, in the heart of the university. I thought I would make a building that looks like a sculpture. And he said, you call that a sculpture? Have a look at it again. And this will be the kind of comments he makes. But I find it very, very stimulating and very inspiring. And he also is a teacher that's very unlike the other professors in the university who are all in their ties and suits. And we have very eminent scholars in the School of Architecture, renowned for their scholarship in vernacular and classical architecture. One of them is, in fact, the Queen's architect for various buildings. So he is really an oddball, but the students love him. And he basically lived with us. We would go to concerts together, go to dance together, go to drinks together, and go to his home to cook together, and so on and so on. And I felt, I just love architecture. Wow, thank you, God. I never thought it would be so wonderful, but it's perfect for me. But then, to answer your question, I didn't quite answer. Then I went through the first year in architecture, and then, in spite of Essie, I found when I got to the final year, enough is enough. For some reason, I was not going to be a mainstream architect. I knew that from the word go. And I saw the second degree, which all my classmates went to. I was just going to be doing projects that are more complex or bigger buildings. And I said, I want to explore. By that time I was doing so well, my final year's tutor agreed with me that I could do an exploratory project. So I devised my own brief and did an urban design project, more like a system design, how to map out a matrix for urban development. When the Board of Examiners looked at it, they didn't know how to deal with it. It's so unlike anything else they've seen before that they were going to fail me. So I thought, oh my God, I cannot fail this degree. I don't want to stay here for another year. So I went to Essie, and Essie said, let me look at the work. And he said, oh, I'll support you. So not only did I not fail, I got a very good grade to graduate with. Then he encouraged me to go to America. I wanted to go there to explore. I visited UPenn, Harvard, Berkeley, and MIT. And I guess of all the places I visited, MIT was the closest to my heart at the time because I wanted to explore something different. And what you're seeing on the screen are some of the studio works that we were doing.
There was a particular teacher at MIT.
Yes.
Morris Smith,
Yes.
and he was inspiring in different ways. To sort of borrow the words of MIT historian Mark Jargenbach, describing this as a very contingent, not to say that it's rebellious, but certainly it was to challenge the establishment of modernism. And I think the way you're speaking to your affection for your teachers, certainly Morris Smith will be one of them. Can you describe that kind of, on one hand, the intimidation of MIT,
Yes.
but on the other hand, you grew into that space and that
Yes.
freedom that you had from that kind of curriculum?
Yes. Well, it started with me happening upon Morris Smith in his office when I visited. So I walked into the office and I said, I'm looking at a place for my second degree, and can I talk to you? And I had the portfolio with me. So he said, show me. So I showed him the work, and he flipped through it and stopped at the page where I showed the Jacobson's drawing of Bush Lane House, which I was working on with Arab Associate at the time. And then they closed the book and threw it out of the office into the corridor. And he said, you do such terrible work and you want to come and study here? By that time, I have so much confidence. I just went out of the room, picked up the portfolio, and came right back. And I said, if I think I'm good as I am, I won't be coming here. But that's the whole point. He was so impressed that we continued the conversation, and they made sure the school accepted me. And what he gave me at the time was what I was looking for. I was looking for not learning about architecture as borrowed references, but going back to the essence of architecture. He was talking about an associative architecture, a contextual architecture that relates to the land, relates to people's response to physical conditions, and how the physical condition promotes succinct experience of whatever experience that is appropriate for the space that you're trying to create. Yeah.
I'm hearing that this sort of formative years, it's almost like learning architecture is like learning life itself. And you spoke about the broader art forms, whether it's literature, dance, music, and they had all inspired you, and you felt somehow free from the constraints of a very straight-jacketed academic kind of training. And so it's not surprising for me that you were so inspired by your teachers. I to some extent, I think some of you know you both as a practicing architect, but also in your voice in education, and as Eunice spoke to your contributions back to the university and so on. It's kind of important to note that you felt that practice was a more compelling way to give back, either to contribute to society or to contribute to the field. Could you speak to this early practice, Lotus Architect, the founding process with Eric Lai, the late Eric Lai, and in 1987, the first competition, Hong Kong UST design competition, there were some very prominent moves, hotly debated, and the whole process of coming to terms with both that environment you were comfortable with at MIT and even Manchester, but also now favoring one over the other, like practice versus being an educator. Would you speak to that kind of tension, but also the promise of both?
No, I would not say that I'm more compelled to practice than teaching. In fact, to me, both were important. I can see how teaching can be inspiring or can be stifling to students. So, in fact, they are both important to me. But teaching to me is not confined to the boundaries of the school. To me, teaching is like Essie has shown us, it's about teaching sensitivity to life, teaching students to be aware that there is a whole wide spectrum of influences that could impact on their work. But at the time, when I started practice, I also joined the university. I was just not willing, as my late husband wanted me to, give up practice altogether, to be completely devoted to teaching. And I think he probably said so because he is very much a teacher. He's completely committed to teaching. And I can see, looking back, how teaching is a commitment. It actually does demand focus and attention, which I have to say, I didn't do so well when I was teaching in the university, because I was also practicing. And on top of that, I was also raising a family. But I felt it's important to practice, because the way I see teaching is also through practice. When I was studying in MIT, a lot of the professors had projects ongoing, and the students would participate. And I felt that would be the best way to teach. And I also felt at the time teaching and having a small practice would be a good combination, in the sense that it allowed us to keep, we've always said we want a small practice, so that we can be selective on projects that we want to undertake, and we see the practice that we want to do as a way of exploring ideas that were not current in the city at the time. But of course, those were the ideals, and reality was a lot more challenging than we expected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The formation of Lotus. I remember you mentioned the kind of genesis of the name Lotus Architect. What was it? If you can shed some light.
My late husband spit it out, and I thought, good, because he, although he doesn't understand Chinese, but then somebody put into his mind this poem, 出於泥而不染，摘青蓮而不咩啊？妖啊。So he has worked with Wang Aoyang, worked on the design, and he felt that if it's worth our while to set up a practice, is to set up a practice that would not be compromised by commercial needs. Yeah.
The notion that this tendency to sort of reject, let's say, a very conventional way, let's say anti-establishment, you can call it on one hand, fueled by this curiosity, the kind of rebelliousness that you spoke about in a very passionate and candid way. You could see that the methods that you were using were quite broad. You said, in a sense, life was a better teacher than just the academy. Could you say something about the appreciation of fine arts in the way that you connect it back to architecture, and eventually gives you a different kind of sensitivity? And later we will end with some projects, for example, attention to human scale and so on. But just for now, the attention to fine arts, craft, detail, and some of the next slides, the Manila projects were interesting to that end. And if you can use it as a foil to discuss your attitudes towards architecture, and so on, materiality, space.
My enjoyment of fine art is not studied. To me, it's illuminating. My personal experience is art makes you constantly review where you are. It pushes you to see things differently, to hear things differently, and feel for things differently. So I'm not sure if the Manila project actually speaks to that, but I would like to say that in my practice, the projects that I appreciate most of all are the projects where I feel I can put my instinct to practice. In the Manila project, by the time I work on this project, I've already done the Spices project in the Pacific Place. it was a number of things. The style, the design direction is very much consistent with Jacques Beck as well as Morris' philosophy, in that one does not borrow language in one's work. One allows one's sensitivity to come into play with every project. If you look through all my projects, each one of them is a completely different approach and different style. In this particular instance, the manila pen was, as you can see in the background, and there was this low structure in that same style at the back of this timber pavilion with a glass curtain wall, and they wanted to expand the restaurant to implement a spices restaurant, which was becoming popular. And they asked me to do an extension, and I looked at the situation. It's right next to the swimming pool, the gardens, and I said, look, you have the great opportunity of doing something that is not just an extension. I said, why don't you keep the old space as an interior restaurant, and I built a pavilion so that you can have an extended restaurant with two different kind of eating atmosphere. And this is sitting in a pond amidst landscaping. And by that time, Eric and I have sort of find a resonance in exploring Southeast Asian architecture, which was never in any curriculum. But we felt this is an unexplored area, and there is so much joy, so much reference that could be equally significant in our work. And in this particular instance, we feel is appropriate. And also, I think at the time, postmodernism was taking hold in America. And we kind of feel that this is an opportunity to do a postmodern architecture, but with an Asian reference.
Thank you. To sort of wrap up, I think we do want to sort of be reminded of some of the highlights that we've gone through, even in the earlier meetings, that the disposition that you're thinking of towards architecture is certainly one that questions some of the mainstream attitudes that a building is well designed, and to the extent that it's heroic, is grandeur. Always, you think of these as maybe not the best way to evaluate architecture. You focus on perhaps projects like this, but also subsequent projects in staircases that you were particularly focused on. It was just interesting that amongst many different elements in the building, this that focuses on the ambulatory movement and the scales and the touch of the user. Does that speak to your interest in human scale and new attitudes towards architecture, perhaps?
Well, to that, I would probably mention an experience. I was working in London at the time, and I went to a lecture given by Aldo van Eyck at the Royal Institute of Architects. And one thing he said stayed in my mind. He was very critical of the modern architecture, contemporary architecture he was seeing around him. And he said, well, the contemporary architecture has come to a stage where you see an attractive building from a distance, you come closer and closer to it, and you see nothing but the building being enlarged. And I relate to that. To me, a building that really is well executed and is a benefit to the community is a building that has been given as much attention at the larger scale as to the detail level. It's not that I was particularly interested in staircases, but they happen to be, I'm thinking as I was in dialogue with you people in recent days, that in fact I have done a wide range of staircases to different style and different configuration. And I come to realize that probably the staircase where the clients are hands-off. So you have freedom. And and I have devised them each time to take advantage of a difficulty in the project. You're staring at Henry Steiner's studio. This staircase came about because he has a very congested space, and I didn't want to waste any more space with the staircase. So I wrapped this new staircase over the old one by touching the landing off the alignment of the existing one and letting it hang above the old one. And I can't really elegantly send support down. So I thought, the railing upstairs can come right down and support the treads like a swing. Henry loved it. And there's great transparency. It retained the spaciousness of the small space. And that's how it is.
Yeah, I think we'll end with the kind of clarity that as you celebrate some of these last projects. I mean, the recent projects. I do remember you speaking very fondly of some of the
Yes.
NGOs that you work with. Again,
Yes.
maybe at the end, really coming full circle to the celebration of their lives, the
Yes.
end users, and how they mix it up. It doesn't have to be perfect. And in fact, again, maybe still very contingent.
Yes.
Compositions are not in this sort of dogmatic way that maybe modernism would have it, but very sort of postmodernism without the historical references, just the playfulness and so on.
I love it that you started with that one slide just now, because this was a fairly recent project, and I reap great satisfaction out of it because the clients are very happy, the users are very happy. The very difficult contractor ended up being very happy, and the client who has used the contractor before said to me, "How did you do it?" We were so nervous when this contractor came on board, but everybody celebrated the project. And I guess it has to do with somehow at my stage in life, I guess I'm also more relaxed. I'm very open to working with people and understanding their problem and nursing them towards my goal. That last picture was the last picture of the entrance. Was when I went back one evening to see how the place works. And I was so happy because there was a lot of anxiety about injecting a youth facility in the housing estate. The neighbors were like, as you can see played out in recent events, they're very nervous about the youth. But we managed to tuck it in very discreetly. From the outside, with the blinds down, all you see is a lit up door. But inside, the kids were dancing away like mad, having a really good time with the electronic equipment playing out loud. We succeeded with the acoustics, okay? That's one thing. And the other thing is the whole informality of this place. I mean, right from the start, the client set a very good framework. They said, we have some ideas, but we want the kids to feel that this is their second home. We want them to have a say. So let's leave the brief open. And they're being consulted constantly. So when the project was opened, I went to the opening, I was so happy. The kids were really enjoying the space. I mean, in that platform where one of the counselors were meeting a mother with a young child, this platform had boxes, craters that the kids have collected from the dumpster, and they set up tables with food, and then next to the counter was another table with a hot pot going, and the kids were streaming around in the other room. They were dancing, they were making music. And in the middle is the stage I made with them. What this person is doing is pulling out some mobile units that I've designed that they can set up as seats or a stage that can move around in the room. And this is a corridor at the end when they put some screens up, and there's a guitar coaching session going on. So in this tiny 2,000 square feet space, a lot happened, and the kids loved it. They call it home. They come when they don't feel like going back to their own home. So very happy with it.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you for sharing. So we'll wrap up. Question and answers perhaps at the end, or yeah. But it's a privilege to sort of hear, to my mind, a life sort of spanning over really the let's say the difficult moments of modernism and the kind of mistrust of modernism and the attitudes that develop. So in some sense, it's a very international, very global discourse, but also happening really in Hong Kong. Working with the very specific context that you have touched on. So thank you very much, Joan.
You're welcome.
Next pair, another dynamic pair. I'd first like to introduce Nora Leong. Nora has been practicing architecture for almost 4 decades, and out of these, she has worked in association with the architect Paul Rudolph for 11 years, of which she had taken part in the design of Bond Center, now known as Lipo Center, as part of Wong and Naoyoung, and also unbuilt schemes of the Harbour Road office and hotel tower, and the Plantation Road residence. One of the noteworthy recent involvement is her publication of Experiencing Bond Center, and she has also curated Paul Rudolph, The Hong Kong Journey, in 2018 at the Center for Architecture in New York. I think she has also a lot of accolades, so I'm going to let you read it in the bulletin. Next, I'm going to introduce her interlocutor, Marisa. Marisa is, like everyone I've been introducing, doing a lot of really exciting work. She's a strong advocate for design in Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area, and has co-founded in 2005 the award-winning multidisciplinary architecture studio with her partner and husband, Eric Schudenfrei, called SQ. She was also chief curator of 2009 Shenzhen and Hong Kong Biennale, by City Biennale of Urbanism and Architecture, is a board member of Ambassadors of Design, and also has taught at HKU, CUHK, and most recently she co-founded Design Trust in 2014. So Nora and Marisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Eunice. Thank you, Shirley, M+, and Hong Kong U, and Nora. I have the pleasure to be your interlocutor. It's been really inspiring. I have so many things to say about women in architecture, but it's been actually extremely inspiring analyzing your work in context of Hong Kong, and also having a lovely Saturday as a safe space in Asia Society to refresh our mind about these empowering women in the last few sessions. So for Nora, as we know and discussed, and I think mainly our focus might be more on your recent work. However, as you're also a graduate of Hong Kong U, and this quote when we met in October, she said, "Architecture is a social art, and it's only when the architecture meaning is perceived by a building's user that a project, however small, becomes significant." You have spanned as a mother, a diplomat, I would say a negotiator in your role, to a women professional that had many opportunities along the way. And as we kind of roll through the slides, I'm sure we'll pick up some of these cues. But predominantly, you really see architecture as a social art, and perhaps that's where we start.
Yes, I think, well, to me, architecture is a social art because in that people have to use it, and you have to use it to feel what was intended to be to be a piece of architecture. I think art is the only thing that can connect what you feel and what you see in consciousness to what you feel in the heart. And when the architecture has a place in your heart, then the architect would be very happy. And this is what I strive to be, however small things that I design, whatever things that happens to be on the drawing table, I would have the users in mind and what their feelings will be. Oh, this is I remember when I saw this, my jaw just dropped. I, well, can you notice the word Democrat? Well, well, on the magazine, it was called a democratic opera house. This is not a very politically correct word at the moment, but you can feel the rage that I underwent when I was a student. I was rebellious. Well, this seems to be an old alumni club, like Hong Kong U alumni around, but to all honesty, I did not really enjoy my time there, mostly because I was in Hong Kong U at the time when there were a lot of different approaches in reaction to modernism. There were so many isms. There were brutalism, there were postmodernism, there were deconstructivism, and the students were actually concentrating on the service, on the cosmetic side of things. And to me, I feel very, well, I came from a very liberal family. My dad was an art teacher. My mom was a music teacher. And we were not well off. We lived in Sham Shui Po. But in Sham Shui Po, I saw how things were made. And this is how I got into architecture. I was very interested in making my own things. But I was equally happy dancing and playing piano and singing. I think Jolin would remember me singing all the time and dancing in the dormitory.
And I just found out that Nora is actually a award-winning dancer with her husband just last week. So
we are partners in life, and we go to Blackpool every year, and. Anna, a lot of people know my husband, and he's supposed to be here, but because we have a family wedding today, so he cannot be here. And we argued a lot, but we're good partners. Yeah, we won some awards in dancing, not as many as in architecture, though. Wow. This is my thesis. As I just mentioned, I did not enjoy my time in Hong Kong U because fellow students concentrate too much on presentation. And there was a book which changed my destiny, the rendering book of Paul Rudolph, which everybody, all the students in Hong Kong U at that time were copying. And I was very lazy. I'm a very lazy student. I don't want to draw so many lines. So it was full of lines, but I like to know why there's so many lines on the drawings. But it was how he rendered light. And I read his essays in the back of the book, and I was very curious about his work. And why this changed my destiny is I really can't believe it. I finally got to work for him. And that changes my life and transformed me.
But can you talk about that moment when you graduated and you went to Wang Aoyang office as an architect, and you clearly said Paul Rudolph chose you, and why you?
Well,
why do you think he chose you?
He didn't actually chose me. That was an opportunity. The previous architect, he did not got along with him, and he actually, he got another job. And Rudolph was very anxious to find another project architect. I was intrigued by the rendering that was around in the office. So I actually made an excuse to go into the design room and gave him tea and sharpened his pencils, introduced myself, made myself visible. So we kind of chatted several times, and he gave me quizzes. And of course, having read the essay, I am very, very fluent in answering the question, and I was chosen to be the project architect for Bond Center. It's a long story. I think Mr. Rudolph and I met at a time where his career and my career were at a turning point. Having been the head of School of Architecture, having built the A&A building in Yale, and having seen the Yale building being burned by students, it really hurt his heart. And he really wants to know why. And he really cared about how people think. And for me, I was just qualified for 3 years. I was very curious in we're human beings from different parts of the world, and we are very anxious to know about each other and also to speak the universal language of humanity. And also, the particular site that we are working on, the Admiralty site, is actually not as developed as how it is now. It is actually an ex-military base. British garrison was there, and they just moved out, and Hong Kong government just sold out plots of land. It's just an empty space. Pacific Place was not there. We talked about how the building would transform the place and how people would react to the place. And that gave rise to the ample space dedicated to the public, the ample public space on street level as well as on terrace level. Well, at that time, Sky Garden, which is a Hong Kong word, Sky Garden, was non-existent. There was no Sky Garden around at that time. And we built a lot of terraces for people to pass around, and we really connect the place from Central to Wan Chai and across. I have built, I think, 5 bridges to connect the Bond Center to the neighboring, and it actually did connect very well, especially from Central to Supreme Court, and connect with Wan Chai as well. The thing is, the street level, it's not that frequently used, but then it's a dedication, and it's a very good gesture to the city. I don't think any developer would agree to dedicate such a space for the city.
And I'm actually more curious. I mean, this is a very powerful image that also represents 1980s, right? It was built in 84. And I understand that you had to encourage and save money to even buy a ticket to go to New York to visit Paul Rudolph. He would come 4 times a year to Hong Kong over the period of, was it 6 years? About 6 years.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of dedication and self-initiation in your own character that I've also observed, where you're really going and being present, ensuring you have a kind of role of negotiation as representing Paul Rudolph in Hong Kong, working with multiple stakeholders and owners and developers. So I just would love to hear more about your own kind of unique collaborative personality and experience. And seeing you in that previous photo of having dinner, I don't know who was sitting next to you, but it just seems like you're always at the table.
Wow, that was that I would say the last dinner. That was his last birthday dinner. He spent birthday 1996 in Hong Kong, and we were dining at Mozartstube. The restaurant closed down already in Glenealy. And actually after that, he knew he had cancer. And it was the only time that he insisted in paying me back for the dinner, and it's the only time that he asked me to escort him to the airport. But during who was at the table? I think a lot of people would recognize Donald Choi. He was doing the Foster's Airport at the time, and next to Donald is my handsome husband. And at the end of the table is Tang Wai Kin. He used to be director in ACOM. Actually, the purpose of the dinner, of course, is to celebrate Mr. Rudolph's birthday. Another purpose is to introduce Don, who was the AP authorized person for the airport, because Rudolph actually, he knew that he would not be able to visit Hong Kong again. And Foster, being his student in Yale, he really wanted to see the drawings of the new airport. So after that dinner, the next day we went to Foster's office, and he had a good look at all the drawings, computer drawings of the airport. The airport was not open until 1998, and he passed away in 1997. I should not say this, but I have to. His comment about the airport is, well, there would be a lot of these airports built in the next century or two, but would you be able to recognize the destination when you arrive in another airport like this? Well, that's his comment, more or less. He's more into regionalism and the sense of place that an architect, that piece of architecture will give you. So he is, well, he admired Foster's work. Foster actually, through Ian, through me, asked him to do a foreword for his book, but he actually say he did not influence any of the students that he taught. Everybody has their own character. So he, I just mentioned he was at a turning point of his career when we met. He was less arrogant, he was more approachable, and he did really wants to speak his heart. He's very, very straightforward. He's really straightforward. He will say whatever is in his mind, but to a particular group of people.
And then when we look at the next slide, actually, it seems like both architecturally, materially, he was also sort of like a mentor, collaborator, Paul Rudolph, to yourself. But it seemed like there was also a lot of lessons learned in the context of Hong Kong. For example, his interest in creating the Lippo Center in context with the IMP building Bank of China during the 80s, all the situations happening in Hong Kong with 1984. Could you talk a little bit about that and the sensitivity that you also learned in the materials, because it was actually on budget, or was it cheaper building in your idea of construction? So could you share a little bit about how you manage that process?
Actually, there are many, many challenges. We have a small team in Wong and Naoyang. At the same time, they are building Pacific Place. So I have only myself and 3 draftsperson, that's all. We have no computer, and you see there are 76 different typical floors to draw by hand. And we have limited budget, and we have long distance, and we have so many partners. So actually, there are a lot of challenges. So I have no choice but to take it to myself that I have to solve all these. And we really work very hard, and because of the long distance communication, sometimes I really have to jump on the plane and just take the drawings to him and just go to New York. There was not even fax machine. And actually, towards the end of 1986, he managed to buy a fax machine. But the fax paper were actually very, it fades off when I got it. So and I have to stay up late at night to call him and to reconfirm his instruction. And some of the details, this is at the detail design stage. He is very particular with scale. Anyone who has read the 6 Determinants of Architectural Form, his essay, would know that scale is one very important element in his design. And he really draws every single detail 1 to 1. You will know how big this drawing is. It's like this long. Everything is one-to-one. And
And how many did you keep? Because maybe this is another side of Nora's specialty. She's
I'm a hoarder. I'm a hoarder.
So, and she's donated, and M Plus has also acquired all of the Rudolph drawings. So I just love to know how many pieces of tracing drawings and models.
Many.
that you-
I still have some, Shirley. Over 100. Over 100. Well, he can draw at the cafe. He can draw, of course, on the when we were on site. I have to keep rows and rows of yellow tracing with me when I was with him, and I have to sharpen dozens of pencils, different color. But one thing very, very unique is he does everything one-to-one scale. No matter how many pieces of tracing paper you have to stick together, he insisted on one-to-one to get the scale right. And he really has the excellent grasp of scale and geometry. You can imagine that when we were detailing the cladding for Bond Center, there were 2-meter diameter columns, and I was asking him how many panels of cladding would you like to divide into, and he just 2 meters we cannot do it one-to-one, right? He just with a scale and with freehand, he can tell me how many divisions, and roughly how many. What is the rough dimension of each panel? His grasp of scale is just mind blowing. Well, when you see him draw, you will know it's just like magic.
And then another project, I suppose, in the Bond Center that is the kind of core project that we can discuss and talk a lot about. But at the same time, while we are looking at these slides of what's going on at Paul Rudolph, I was hoping to segue a bit into your family life, because there's a moment where you're going to New York a lot. The city itself also became like a home, but also
Yes,
like
it's my second home now.
Yeah, and your daughter was born in the 80s, was it? That's right.
My daughter was born in 1994, and
okay.
actually, I have a story to tell if I don't bore you. Well, it's particularly close to my heart. At that time, in 1993, I was bringing this model. Well, there's a model to this project, which I did after Wang and Naoyang. I left Wang and Naoyang after completing Bond Center because I have mixed feelings. I want to do my own things. I want to also be able to really see how to practice architecture, and well, the impact that Bond Center has on me was really great, and I have to take my time to document the process of experiencing Bond Center, of designing and helping Paul Rudolph, and the book finally published in 1992. 91 or 92, about that time, experiencing Bond Center. And I was on my own at that time, and I was helping Paul Rudolph on his Southeast Asian projects. One of them is the Harbor Road project, which I introduced Mr. Rudolph to Sino and the Kwok brothers. This is on the site of the Central Plaza. Going back to my magical story, I was carrying this model in 1993 we knew that we did not win the competition, and actually Central Plaza was being built already, but there was a lot of interest in the design, especially this design is close to Paul's heart because he really want to express the regional character, really want to express the Chinese character of Hong Kong in like Dharmala building. It's very close to his kind of thinking. So I was carrying this 1 meter high model back to New York for an exhibition in the National Institute for Architectural Education, now the Van Allen Institute, for an exhibition and also a lecture in Cooper Hewitt. And after the exhibition, I kind of strolled off to Rockefeller Center. And at that moment, at that point in my life, I was actually I actually felt my life was very fulfilled. I have an interesting job. I'm really out to see the world. I feel very satisfied. But at that moment, the Christmas tree, the Rockefeller Plaza Christmas tree just suddenly light up. And there was a split second that New York City paused to breathe in an air of tranquility. And I feel a sense of joy. And then there were little girls coming out to skate around the Christmas tree. Oh, I think that is the joy of life. That is humanity. And I thought, I could have a family too. So 10 months later, my daughter was born. And actually, last year when I was doing the exhibition and the talk in the Center for Architecture, Colleen was in the audience, and she's now working in Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And it's really a miracle for me. And yeah, New York is my second home.
Mine too, somewhat. I left Hong Kong in 93, 94 for New York City. So we have a lot of parallels. Maybe that's why you put me with Nora. But talking about your role, I mean, obviously you started your company and then you partnered with your husband and another colleague. At the same time, you're championing all the experience of Paul Rudolph. But I have a feeling no one's written about this, but perhaps the question of your role in Hong Kong as his representative, his colleague, the architect, you're as important in Paul Rudolph's legacy along the way. And I think that's a very special role to see someone who's born and raised in Hong Kong and as a Hong Kong architect to have that opportunity, that special moment. And then now your generosity of giving back through the archives, through talks, through publications, has really shaped who you are. And I think this particular moment for you must be quite special to have that.
It is
presentation.
very, very special. It's very special. We had, well, privately, we had a drone, filming for the opening. To present the film of Hong Kong. There were no protests last year, luckily. And all the drawings I have kept for more than 30 years. It was at the back of my cabinet, in a special place, in a black box. And I have been in contact with Mr. Rudolph's companion for all these years. During the days that I work for him, during the Harbor Road days and the Plantation Road days, we made many trips. We actually made a trip to the Great Wall of China. We visited Shanghai and we visited the Shanghai Gardens. He especially made the point to visit I.M. Pei's home. And we are really very close friends. And when my daughter was born, he played with the baby, and so forth. And actually, I felt this. I felt all the belongings. I kept very, very, very precious, and I kept in touch with Ernst Wagner, his companion, and I became the director of the Paul Rudolph Heritage Foundation. For keeping alive his legacy. The headquarters is in New York in the Modulator building in East 46th Street. East 58th Street.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was Paul Rudolph's 100 years birthday, and they really have no things to show because Paul Rudolph has donated almost all the drawings in his office to the Library of Congress, and it is in the archive in Washington, D.C. And so it cannot be lent out for a public exhibition. So being an ex-director of the Heritage Foundation, we have to find a way, and we talked to Khan's son, Nathaniel, and we talked to a lot of people, and they found that the later part of Paul's career is actually not very known to the public. So there I was. I had so many drawings, and I said, okay, I can make the drawings. I can curate the exhibition. And so Center for Architecture is very kind, and he let us use the space, and it was there for actually 4 full months, and there are 2 symposium. We had one symposium on the way of working, and the other symposium was actually facilitated by Barry Bergdahl of Columbia University. So a number of professors from Hong Kong U and Chinese U also went to participate. So that was a big event, and even the event was actually reported in New York Times. So
and then our foundation had a very small support to run the talks with Sang Kwan and Barry.
yes.
So that's
Design Trust.
There's another relationship
Yes.
we have. But maybe fast forward, because I know we only have a few more minutes. In projects, it's interesting because like Paul Rudolph's working, the drawings, the spatiality, the complexities, like floor plans are always different. He opens up the ground plane for the public. And so the next slides will really talk about your projects in Hong Kong, which offer another lens of maybe a question about practicing as an architect in Hong Kong and the kind of strict regulatory projects, but still breakthroughs of innovation. So as we walk through this, I know Rottenji Hospital was a big project, and there are a few other ones that we'll see that highlight how the Rudolph years, Wong and Ouyang, and also yourself, that's quite deeply involved in philanthropic projects and different NGOs. Maybe you can talk about that as a social practice. Yeah.
Yeah, this is, well, the current phase I'm in. I'm practicing together with my husband. Actually, the firm Chow Koo & Leung. Chow is an elderly architect when we joined together. And we joined together because he is a specialist in designing hospital. So the first project we completed in Chow Koo & Leung was the Ruttenji Hospital. What Mr. Rudolph taught me, I would not, I dare not follow any of the, well, I'm not a stylish person. I do not follow styles, but he taught me about site specific. Look at the site. And actually for Ruttenji Hospital, we open up Queen's Road access. We actually, the road is in a mess, but when we came in, a lot of things were built already, but we think the access was not very ideal. So we opened up the access, and then we built the rehabilitation garden. But what taught me in this project is the very disciplined methodology, which has to be followed in healthcare design. I think we have a lot of slides. We better flip through. This is
your favorite.
Yeah,
right?
this is my favorite. This is really my favorite. This is a Sunnyside School in Tseung Kwan O. We have to build around an existing toy library, which is built by hand by a group of volunteers. And actually, after this project, I and my daughter volunteer in helping the mentally handicapped people throughout our, well, actually up to now, we are still volunteering. And for this particular project, I insisted on, it's again a low budget project. I insisted on staining the wood instead of painting the wood, because the mentally handicapped, the mentally challenged kids, they would scrape off the paint because the bright color would actually stimulate them, but they don't know what they would do. And by staining the wood, the wood really lasts. The color really stay there and seeps through the grains of the wood, and it's better maintenance, and it's better hygiene for the place. And I have a very hard time, convincing the contractor this is the way to do it, without adding the cost and so forth. So, 20 years on, we are doing a maintenance project for EDB, and we are maintaining this school. And the principal actually came out to greet me and said, "We've done a good job. It's still in good shape." So I was
So we have
really,
to
really
stain the
happy.
wood. Maybe Winnie can add a new guideline to architecture service policy material. And then the next slide actually is of your office.
Yeah, our office, we moved actually, but because of the high rent. This is originally Zhuhai College, and this actually we had a hard time convincing the developer to connect with the lesson from Barnes Center. I really like urban design. I like to see the place grow. It's a good building, but it doesn't connect well. But it's a beginning of gentrifying the Mong Kok actually. It's one of the first curtain wall buildings in that area, and we had an office built there. This is our flagship, our flagship sustainability project, and we are very thankful to our client Yao Li, who actually, because Conrad is the chairman of the Green Council, so he is very much into sustainability. We advocated the use of recycled energy, and there were actually what you see, the different shape panels. They are photovoltaic panels, and we actually adopted open staircase instead of the conventional scissor staircase. So in that way, people can feel little open air. They can sneak out and smoke. And also we initiated a number of housekeeping rules, like when you, not rules, actually the practice. When you take out the card from the room, the blind will automatically close off the aircon. And we have a few rooms with headboard cooler. When you are asleep, you have the choice to switch on the headboard cooler, switch off the room aircon. In that way, only around your bed is being cooled, and that saved a lot of energy. We actually built Holiday Inn in Causeway Bay, and this is the second Holiday Inn Express that we built. With this Holiday Inn Express, with all the green features, it actually saved up to more than 50% of electricity consumption. So it really pays off. And the other thing about
Special
this,
with your daughter.
yeah, this is a special project that we collaborated with my daughter. She was an high-level art in middle school to high school, and she has this project of helping the autistic adults. She has one autistic and one Down syndrome. They call it adult with learning disability. She was helping two adults learn art, and she took these two adults to go around Shangwan to paint paintings. You can see Western Market in the bedroom. You can see the Manmo Temple, the incense burning, and you can see the trinket shops in Shangwan. And she has this, she has 18 paintings, and she curated a show in St. John's Cathedral. And in the end, she asked me, I have these 18 paintings, what am I going to do with it? And I said, I give you a link. You write to Miss Wong and see if she likes it. And she actually sold the paintings to Holiday Inn Express. And this became our community engagement project. We sold the paintings. We actually made copies of the painting in a style that comply with the Holiday Inn guideline, and put in the room. And really, we also draw a map of where the paintings were painted, you know, the Western Market, and it helps with the getting around Shangwan. It's the building. Holiday Inn is actually in Shangwan, and it really points out the way that an interesting way that architect can do to give back to the community. I mean, the multifaceted role of an architect.
And I think you resonate the kind of multicultural, multifaceted, multidisciplinary women architect. And I think the last project, just we can briefly share, is the Dak Lok Public Housing Project.
Yes.
And I believe this means a lot to you as the kind of conclusive project, but also questions for the future. I think within this context of discussion of housing today, Hong Kong architecture in the city, and also your curatorial interests, whereby you also handpick artworks, and also with the desire to build up more sustainability and accountability measures from the architecture profession. So perhaps you can conclude with this project.
This is actually, the project is not new. It's 2013. Subsequently, we have done a number of public housing projects. But this is in a new area in Kai Tak, which resonates with what Winnie has spoken about. It's a new area that we want to develop into an area with energy, Kowloon East, and it's the old Kai Tak. But we like to preserve the memory of Kai Tak. There are already a museum, and there are already a lot written about Kai Tak. But we also like to know about the history of the place, and it's actually on the site is right on the runway of the Japanese runway when Japanese was occupying Hong Kong. So actually in the center of the site we have this runway. This is actually a symbol of the airplane, which we use repetitively in the graphics. And you can see the runway in the, all the straight lines. Probably this was not very clear, but then we had this concept of home in the park, but inside the park we reconstructed the runway. And also the impact of building public housing was very great on me when I was a student, because of the Vietnamese refugees coming into Hong Kong. And I really want to do something about public housing. And it has come a long way since Ada Fong. She retired already, but she actually revamped the way that public housing was being designed. And we all sit here very comfortably, but we never imagined the level of poverty some of these occupants are in when they live in public housing. They have no money for food, they have no no, not to mention aircon, no money to pay the electricity bill. So we really have to design down to the basic. And for the placement of each block, although it's a modular, the units are all in modules, but we run multiple computer programs to see the lighting and ventilation, to make sure that people with the bare minimum of means can survive in their units. And also, since the living units is so small, we are bound to this size, we are bound to this module, but at least we can create a neighborhood and a community for them. So in this project, we initiated neighborhood garden. When they come out of their block, they have a piece of land to themselves, and then they have the big garden, and they have the place to wait for their grandchildren to come home, and they have community farming, and all sorts of these features actually are in public housing. And the public space, the landscape garden, became an outdoor living room for them, because the living unit was so small, and we really want them to enjoy fresh air. And actually, you can see in modern day, in the newer public housing, it really creates a community, because people tend to gather around the public, the open space, the neighborhood space. It really creates a neighborhood, although the living condition was not as good as what we enjoy.
I think we have a lot to talk about, and I'm sure afterwards we'll get another round of discussions. But Nora, it's been so incredible to meet you finally, and have this
honor to be here.
opportunity. Let's thank Nora for sharing her career journey with us.
I'm privileged to share the final pair, Joan Lin Ao and Clover Lee. Joan Lin has come up multiple times today, so I'm not going to belabor you with a long intro. However, some key points here. She's director currently of JA Design Architects, which she has co-founded in 1997. And of course, the practice have received a number of awards. She is a graduate, of course, of Hong Kong U and a mentor to many, it seems. She began her career with D.A. Russell and Associates in Hong Kong. And in 1983, she was the first woman architect from Hong Kong to join the HSBC headquarters design team. And she worked on the project for a number of years, and then continued, and later on went on to set up her own practice, and previously was vice president of HKIA. Clover is director of Plus Clover, an architecture and design practice which she co-founded in the early 2000s. It was originally based in LA, but she relocated back home in Hong Kong in 2009. Her practice favors collaboration, and she has a diverse portfolio of work. And she has taught in multiple places, including the latest at CUHK, and she's also an external examiner at HKU. Many of the issues that came up in the previous conversations will come up again. I do want to acknowledge this collaboration with daughters. We will hear that again, and that's a really amazing thing. Can we have Joan Lin and Clover on stage?
Well, I think Winnie stole my thunder in the love letter to Joan Lin, but really want to thank Eunice and Shirley for this opportunity, because it really has been great to meet Joan Lin and get to know her better. Actually, the next slide will show this quote where when I saw it, where Joan Lin talks about how she doesn't want to talk about the differences between the genders, I thought, well, Eunice and Shirley gave me the difficult pick. She doesn't want to talk about being a woman architect. Because I think a lot of times when that topic comes up, it's about excluding or partitioning instead of being inclusive, which after having met Joan Lin and talked to her about it, I really think that what is amazing about her is her wide range of interests outside of architecture and how those interests has informed her work, in a sense that it's really about the kind of width of or a breadth of interest that you have. They're wide ranging and very inclusive. And we can start with maybe you can telling us a little bit about what Winnie have mentioned in terms of your interest in art and maybe how you then stumbled into architecture.
Okay. Well, it's a long day, so yeah. It's not that because I do not want to talk about being a woman architect, but it's only because we got so many advantages of being a woman. Now, in the old days, I like art and painting a lot. When I was young, my family was not very well off, but still, my dad insisted that every one of his kids, 8 of us, we have to pick up one of the hobbies, and I pick up painting. I used a lot of the different medias, like watercolor, like oil painting, but the one media that I enjoy the most is ink painting on rice paper. It's being that when I did the oil paintings, sometimes because we just want to save money, we did not want to spend money on yet another canvas, and the whole painting can be built, can be painted anew. But ink painting is not. Everyone's stroke got to be definite, and no mistake can be spared. So we have to think and plan ahead of every one brushstroke before we paint. And that is the part that I think is very important, that a mind has to be set there before a person acts.
But it's also, I think, about embracing the unknown parts of it, that you cannot control every single part of the ink painting. When I first met Joan Lin, Eunice told me the story about this performance you did at Hong Kong IA of doing a painting or drawing of one of the projects that we'll see in a little bit. And the idea of intuition that you have, I think it's very much related to this mode of representation that you really owned. Can you tell us a little bit about this particular project that's very defining for you?
My works in the university, actually, there are 2 main parts at what Clover had mentioned, last time we met, is that one is on the art part, and the other perspective is on the technology part. And this one probably is representing more of the art and cultural parts. This one is, in fact, there is another one which I like quite a lot. It's one of my year 2 project. It's on the Tin Hau Temple that I used the ink art to just paint quite bravely on stone masks that resemble a Tin Hau Temple. And it is the second attempt that I presented at the university. 2 students, myself and Wang Waseng, with the works are being selected to enter into this UIA Mexico competition. Some people saying that this is a very brave attempt of a presentation, but in fact, this is the end product of one of my mistakes. Before I did this, I think about 10 of my classmates, because everybody was so excited at the university, helped me to, of course, under my instruction, to paste up using Joyce paper, the colored Joyce papers, and I cut into small pieces, and then paste it together like a matrix. But I think only 2 or 3 days before the handing dates, and I'm going to look at the entire set of the presentation again. I talked to my classmates. Wow, is this it is this would not really help to express the scheme. So I talked to my classmate, maybe I have to rethink. They ask, well, such a short time, what can you do? Just 1 or 2 days left. So one evening, I took out a few pieces of very large rice paper and stuck it on the wall of the crit room. And overnight, I repaint the entire entry for this Cheung Chau administrative zone central place planning, with the right-hand side of the drawing being the pier, conserving the entrance in some of the village houses, and then expanding it to the community communal areas, opera theaters, and then down to the bridge with the play area and the wave tubes, etc. And with the I think no English there. Yeah, the English is there as well. And then in the morning, very early morning hours, the professor, walked past the crit room door about 7 or 8 before the lessons with his usual cigar puffing. And then he asked, do you want to submit this? I said, yes, I intend to do this. Okay, I'll ask the secretary to have the English translated into Spanish for you. So together with these 2 pieces, and then we just, I just sent it in, and luckily we got an award. And with that award, myself and Wong Wah Sang got the chance to visit Germany. Michael Loy in London, who treated us the very nice the sessions in Riber. So there was a great experience using this media as a presentation.
And how did this project also inform? You also mentioned another project that you did while you were at Hong Kong U, which was your thesis, the Ecopolis. Yeah. Like how did the 2 projects kind of inform each other?
Well, actually, I love art and also science, and this is probably the other part of my passion, is to research into the science part and also technology part of projects. I grew up in Tai Po Market, and during my student and also as a junior classes in the university, I passed by Sha Tin New Town, and during that time there was great conflicts of tearing the Sha Tin old town down, reclamation going on, and the new resettlement, the new estates going up. So I've been talking to myself, for public housing and also for mass density developments, must we just use reclaimed lands as the only solution? And my final projects at the university, which is I took up this idea of the Ecopolis. Eco meaning ecology, and polis is the city. The site that I've chosen is that the entire city is to be floated on water with the natural cooling, and it is the settlement that is to give a solution to the natural environment that human settlements are in conflict with. The separate masses that we study the solar aspect, the cooling by the waves, the mangrove groves, supporting of the different industries, and also communal areas, how it is going to be associated with the habitats. Interestingly, this thesis, it took about, there was the last project, and we spent a lot of time on it. Every evening, I study research into one particular topic, from carbon dioxide, the equation of any one person or anyone dwelling that the plantation that is required to neutralize the carbon dioxide, from the way that the mangrove can grow, from the tidal energy that you can agitate, from solar aspect that the clusters should be formed, that it will generate natural ventilation to the blocks, etc. I check into my tutor's pigeonhole every morning. a chunk of paper that was in brown, if you remember him. And he actually, how can you do that? You can never finish the thesis report. And at the end, someone's partner, girlfriend, helped me to type most of the reports. But unfortunately,
That certainly doesn't happen anymore.
no, I don't think it's going to happen anymore.
But it's
So I still enjoy the part of it is the intense research that is required out of any one project.
And I mean, Eunice mentioned that you were on the team, the Norman Foster team, of working on the HSBC project, which one would think that maybe all of the
Hairstyle.
research and technology and performance that you worked on a thesis, it's related to how you got this job, when in fact it's not. And it goes back to your wide-ranging interests that resulted in you actually landing this job. Do you want to share that with us?
Okay. So after graduation, of course, as mentioned earlier, I worked with D.A. Russell. D.A. Russell is also very good, probably like Rudolph. He draw freehand and it's to scale. And that generation of architects, they have this kind of skill to do it. Well, joining this is that after D.A. Russell, I told myself that I would hope to work for a practice which is very technology based. So one of it on the list is the Fosters. So I went to London and then I joined a London-based company, setting myself up to apply to the Fosters. But during the weekends, during that 6 months or so, during the weekend, I went to Dunstable Dance and pick up gliding lessons. The reason that I love flying is because the core of my elder brother, and I knew him as well. Apart from his normal job, he is a commercial pilot. So he took me to Kitech. We went to Arizona together and flew, and then we used to practice in this tin can Cessnas, but I don't like the heat and also the noise of the tin cans. But I love gliding, so I went to London and picked up this gliding intensive lessons at Dunstable Dance. So after writing into the office, I was being interviewed by the chief architect, and then the next session is by the director. And after the director, they say that you will be meeting Norman for briefly. So I meet him briefly, but during the very brief session, we talk about nothing but gliding and his proposed aerodrome at Dunstable Dance. And then the next morning, the director called, well, we have a position for you. Would you mind coming back to Hong Kong and then work for the bank? So the answer is natural. So now on this particular picture, I just want to say is that, well, at that moment, not that too many female architects. Probably I can only say one, and the other lady is working there with my classmate Jennifer. She's working on the interior. She's not the architect. So quite often I got being interviewed by magazines, and my teammate, who is the big boss of a big firm now, and he said, "How come that I will not being given the same consideration?" He said, "Is it because I am a he?" So,
Did he have hair like that?
Unfortunately, no. Probably that makes a difference. Now, the drawing on the right, on the left, is that is one of my ink painting as well. It is fairly big, I think about the full height of this stage. That is also ink brush and on the back. And it's good thing is that. I missed out one thing is, although I like painting, when I got the admission to the university, this ink painting reminds me because we have a group of artists which is who are still bonded together, and we have annual exhibitions on art. Our tutor is a very famous and renowned artist now, Professor Liu. I went up to him, asked him, well, the University of Hong Kong has offered me this studentship to study architecture. Should I remain to be an artist, or should I say yes to the university? And he came me with a stern face and said, "Don't ever be an artist." But he's so famous, his artworks cost priceless. But even so, I think I've been able to enjoy the beauty of both worlds, of being an architect and being an artist at the same time.
Because you mentioned when you were working on the HSBC that everything you drew, they built. And you drew every screw, every nut, which is amazing to think that you did the kind of, this type of drawing as well as the ink drawing in
I
parallel.
think I got hundreds of these drawings. There is no computer then, and everything is hand-drawn. And some drawings has to be one-to-one, and with a tolerance of 2 to 3 millimeters that the entire team has to work on. For 3.5 years, we only drew. We went to the sites. We only hands-on with glass, stainless steel, and aluminium, and then more glass, more steel, more aluminium for 3.5 years. Except meeting for Normans. Every so often he came to Hong Kong. I do not want to say how many times for parties and meeting, and yeah. So.
Which it was also
And
mentioned
exactly, anything we draw to build it. The drawing to the right. This is the section of a steel structure that we have sections, elevations, and etc. The bracketry, that is a kind of thing that whatever shape we want, we have to design all the brackets and then hold the whole thing together. Yeah.
it was brought up that after working Norman Foster, after working at HSBC, you were design director at Ho and Partners.
Yes.
That was when Winnie was there, and you were her mentor, and also you were at
We enjoyed the days, isn't it?
Wang Dong also.
Oh no, yeah, because we did so many competitions. Ho and Partners then was not on the ASA list, and at the end we got projects which is like the university, like SWAT's stadiums, which is good, yeah.
Which after working at these two firms, that's when you started your own practice. And I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about how did working at these different offices shape how you saw your own practice? Or how did it kind of push you towards saying, I want to start my own practice?
I mean, after this part of the stainless steel, metal, aluminum, and glass, I think we have to go back to humans. And of course, I did my license. So I joined the two very famous and very big practices for a number of years. But the lessons that I've learned is that in the commercial sector, we do need to pay at the end of the month. So sometimes design have to sacrifice for time. So this is one thing that I find it very hard to swallow. And even I work day and night, and the other director came over and said, stop, it has to be submitted to General Peter Pan so that we reach the next stage for the next stage payment. So on and off, frequent comeback. And for the other practice is, of course, it's similar to the previous one as well. The design people into the design team and also the administrative team. If you're good at design, you stay in design, and then. But sometimes after the drawings and designs are done, and then I went back to the site, like one project in Shanghai, I said, why is it like that? So it is built like that, but it is not loyal to the original. But of course, from the design to the construction, and there's so many decisions got to make throughout. And the way the decisions are made are giving away design this is something that I find it very difficult. So I told myself that, well, it's time that it's better that in order to have a full control of the entire project, one has to work for herself. So I started my my own practice.
I think that brings
It was
up,
in a difficult time, 1997.
because I think it brings up something that was brought up in the very beginning about authorship, like in terms of, you know, I think that authorship is beyond just designing the project or stopping at, let's say, a drawing, but really, I think you brought the importance of execution, right, of
Yes.
actually building,
Yes.
which does need to solicit a lot of collaborators, contractors, other consultants, where it's really about the kind of teamwork, bringing a team together to execute the project.
Oh yes. Well, I think in all building projects that is the same. Collaboration, teamwork, and different people together. But to be a boss that only have the right hand to ask for my left hand, is that I will have to answer to my clients. There are some clients who will have project managers and they have market expectations, etc. They will give you a brief, whatever. But I enjoy most that for nearing 20 years, I still have 1 or 2 clients who I have to touch wood. They really give me the free hand, and it's just give me a blank paper and then to work on. They only tell he probably will only tell me how many rooms he want in the house, and then he will just let me do it. And I mean, this is finished. Open the door and then give you a special session to say thank you. And that is the kind of projects which I really treasure and enjoy. These are Holbein Partners projects. Yeah. For that, we finished many prestigious mansions when I worked for myself. Those are the timber house, like a stone house, etc. Yeah. Now Ship Street on this one. This is the also by Ada Wong initiated in Wan Chai. But we do not have the. We are not as fortunate as the Kowloon East. Parik sector project, of course, although it's a very heavy community engagement, although we got first prize, which is a very tough exercise, we have to present to 20 odd different stakeholders to convince them that the public area would be transformed like this in a way that the setting is similar to the Changchang setting. But at the end, because the big brother developer next door, he took up the site, including the Nankou Terrace as well. So the project came to an end, without having built.
But it did start also a series of projects where you're interested in notion of time, the passing of time and history, the kind of historical fabric of the city that culminates in also like the YMCA project and the Lijiang project.
Oh, yeah. I think one of the, apart from those commercial projects that we did, and one of which that I enjoy when working a lot is the YMCA of Hong Kong is next to the peninsula. Before we of course the old YMCA building and also is now under renovation now. We were asked to redo all the skylights and the atrium, etc. So in order to find a theming for the design is difficult because we have this peninsula right next to us. So we have to respond in a different way. So it's lucky that we have chosen the nature as the theming for the approach. Also, we have some very good project manager within the YMCA because YMCA of NGO, very low budget project. Even we took pictures, like on the top, we have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to catch the 6 o'clock got the with the, and then we went up to the Geopark and then took photographs of the sunrise, the color of the sunrise on the Geopark, and some of those images we have montaged and then used it as graphics. And also, in order to be cost effective, we use a lot of stone from Fujian. But the stone, in other projects, people would use the stone from the core of the quarry, which are we have the best quality, the best consistency, even color, etc. But we can't afford that. We chose stone from the perimeter of the quarry, which are acid rain washed, corroded, and we cut them into slabs and slices, and then turn it into tables, wall murals, panels, etc. YMCA was very skeptical on that. I mean, can you really use that? And they gave me a very severe, intense test. And they put the stone on the floor and divide it into 9 grids, and then put on it, God knows, Coca-Cola, soya, and outlet exit, whatever. And 3 days later, you pass the test. Okay, we use it. And the stone is still very nice because we use just a simple sandblast on the acid etched stone, and then give it a clear protection, so it takes up all the traffic of the trolleys and the heavy traffic of the customers. The rental of the hotel room after that is even higher than the neighboring one. Of course, not Peninsula, but the neighboring one. And we also use salvaged timber from ship locks for the atrium skylight. During the duration of the past 20 years, I also spent quite a lot of time in mainland China. The market in China is very different, but the good thing is, especially, I think probably a woman, they never say no. They respect your advice. In particular, in the 10 years earlier on, when the market is only opened. Of the many projects that we worked on, but because China is such a vast terrain from north to south, the geology, the climate, the weather, the clanship, they're all different. One of which that we completed is for St. Regis in Lijiang. The exercise of the ecopolist told me to carry out an intensive study of the particular clan. Here we use the Napsai Nasiju, and of course the Yulong Shishan, the Jade Dragon Ice Mountain, and the roofscape. 佢哋係講屋頂文化。Is the culture of the expression of the roofscape. And also that is the first painting that I did, is the one of the villa mansions, is the square courtyard, and how the daylight will cast shadow, reflection, and how the access and also the various spaces. But we turn it into a contemporary expression.
Which, I mean, again, it's amazing to see, like, you continue the ink painting as a means of representation, like throughout, from the Changqiao project to this one. And one of the last projects I think we're going to look at is a project where you not only are working with the painting, but also with music.
Oh, yes.
And thus the working with the daughter, Nicole.
Nicola. Yeah. When I started up my practice, Nicola and Brian, they were very young. So it actually, I think all the women architects share the same story. Is that I miss them during the daytime, but of course they have the schoolwork. So I've almost insisted to find time to have dinner with them and then go through the happenings during the daytime. And they were in bed, I would have to go back to the office and sometimes stay overnight in the office because, but it's good to see them grow up and to the collaboration, which is one of my very, very happy work. Now this project is for a client that we work again, China Truffles. It is a hotel competition project in Ningxia, which is to the northern part of China, and there's the desert right next to it, next to the Huanghe. I've chosen the vanishing city transit station of Liu Lan Gu Sing. And we also visited the very sensational, which I find is the Gouchang Gu Sing, the wisdom of our ancestors and how they create spaces. And if I want to recreate those sensations into architecture. So we only see ruins of the timber that is left behind, but water as the very precious element amidst the sunset will lit up the reception of the hotel. This is one of the visuals. And the other ones, ruin is, working with ruins actually is one of my recent passion. Apart from this one, I also work in another competition for a museum just off Macau using Portuguese ruined forts, and then just put a huge block of state-of-the-art glass block for art display. And also this one also put yet another glass block, and that is facing north, which is the prevailing wind. When the wind blows up the sand dust, and the garden to the south, we have the sand-clad landscape change constantly over time.
So for this project, there's a short movie that you made.
Oh yes.
Where Nicole wrote the music for.
Yes.
I mean, there's certain power dynamics of working with your spouse, but what is it like working with your daughter?
Well, in the presentation, I find it sometimes it is good because during presentation, although we have the PowerPoint, we have all these wordings, etc., but the most sensation part is that when the music brings the concept out. So I will already arrange all those visuals that is required, and I set up the flow of the visuals, and then Nicola, she will key in the particular tune that is required to express the scene best. This music is using Ma Tou Kam, one of the Sangeung's, the Sangeung's local folk music instrument, based on this Mongolian melody. The music can be loud. You can bring the volume up a bit.
have to let these go while I invite the other speakers together up on stage for our final very quick conversation, because we're a little bit over time. However, we think it's really important that we have the final session together to take at least one, if not more, conversation. We do. So we. And because it's a final session, I would like to invite perhaps if the interlocutors have, by way of really, I believe you have both enjoyed all the conversations, not with just the session, but the earlier ones. If you could, if I could invite either Clover, Marissa, or Kuhn to pose or kind of share some reflections or perhaps questions.
I was actually quite struck this morning when Wang Laoshi said something about there's no definition or there shouldn't be any discrimination in definition. So, and then obviously there's questions of equality and the role of women and empowerment. But maybe it's not so much a question, but it's also. And I suppose Winnie also said women talk really well, but I think we also do, we act well, and there's a generosity of intellect and time, which is, I'm not saying it's a gender thing. I feel bad for you, you're the minority. But I'm also here because my husband is taking care of our kids and having a wonderful time, and I think there's a nice kind of balance, and maybe that's the question I have is, I'm so empowered and inspired by the more senior architects here, and giving us hope and optimism about our role and our stake in Hong Kong. But the question of equality and your role and imparting thoughts, I think that's an important thing for both academia and institutions, and also just being here in Hong Kong. And I don't know if maybe Nora or Jolene or someone wants to. Is that okay?
Well, can you hear me? Well, growing up in Hong Kong is already very difficult. We all grew up here, probably not Joan. I was fortunate to have my family support, but I think the authority need to understand humanity and really need to understand people, what people thinks. I'm not on either side. I'm not. I have to say something politically correct, but it's a lack of understanding. It's lack of understanding between authority and the people. I have been working on government projects and public housing, different. I've seen different sectors of people. I've seen people living below poverty level, and I have, at the same time, concurrently built houses for tycoons. And I have to switch my mind, and it's really a different world. Hong Kong is so diverse, but people do not accept diversity. That's the problem, always. And people are not inclusive. I mean, the bubble that I see, the emotional bubble that I see in a lot of people are so big. I mean, having lived in New York and having worked in New York, it's a similar city, but people do have prejudices everywhere. But the emotional bubble in Hong Kong is so big, people do not like you to read what's in their mind. And well, sorry, really, sorry. And the government would not like to read what's in their mind. So the bubble burst. I don't want to talk about this, but as a woman, but you know, the emphasis is on women. Women are more sensitive. I mean, we do bring people together. And I hope that architecture can be an instrument of bringing people together too. I mean, building public spaces, creating a community. We work with different types of people, and well, with my own office, it's easier. We can do pro bono work. We can start up our own little projects. I've been helping with the Nesbitt Center, building cafes in St. John's Cathedral. We'll build a prefab house and pop it in St. John's Cathedral and sign as a temporary building. And we can loop our way around the regulations. But the ultimate thing is the authority must wake up. I mean, they must wake up and feel the pulse of the people. I mean, people are so angry now, so I would not like to talk about it. But with architectural education, I was not happy in Hong Kong U because people are so, you know, people like to copy, people like the superficial side of thing. But ultimately, we have to know the basic, we have to know the fundamentals. We have to know where the light comes from, where the ventilation is going. We have to know who is eventually going to use the space. As women, again, because this is the topic of this symposium, we tend to be more sensitive. We are more sensitive to people's feelings, and I'd like this sensitivity to be brought to our practice, and just know what people feel. And I really am confirmed that architecture is a social art. It has to be used, and we have to know how people feel, because art is the only thing that connects what you see with what you feel in the heart. Sorry, it's taken up so much time.
If I may pick up from what Nora said, she started off this response, which with saying something that inspired me to respond by remembering something that my late husband said. There was a time when we have heated arguments at home, and but after the argument, he always rationalizes, and he said, you know, the difference between men and women is men argue to win, women argue from reason, and and when I say that, in effect, it's not saying from a critical point of view, but I do feel that men and women are different characters. I've never felt the need to fight for equality for the sexes, but equal opportunity. And earlier, Anna mentioned about some of us being in Saunter Club, and I was too. And I remember being somewhat upset. At the time, I was, in fact, the president of the Saunter Club of Hong Kong. And we led a group to talk to the Commission of Women, led by Stella Lau. Yeah, Women's Commission. And I was really taken aback when she said, at the moment, there are about 2% women in board of directors. And then another woman in the team said, we're already improving. And for women to get into a better position, they have to work hard to prove themselves. And I have to say, I was really upset to hear that. Why should women have to work doubly hard to win an equal share in decision making, because after all, the society is made by men and women with their different assets and contribution, the ability to contribute. And on that note, I'm very happy to have observed M+, in fact, has gone some way to address that issue. There is, in many of the sections of the administration or governing bodies, there's a good balance of men and women. I dare say, when I applied to MIT, many of people I spoke to said, you will have no chance, Joe. But I got there with ease. And I think also it was thanks to the Equal Opportunity Amendment that was very prevalent at the time. And MIT was deliberately addressing the imbalance. So they have a determined quota of women women students that they want to take into the university. And that gave opportunity. And I think if we want to address that inequality in society, inequality in opportunity, legislation or restructuring needs to take place to allow women to make up for the shortfall. If they were having to always fight on an equal plane, then it would take too long. And then the current of life would just move on and they'll never catch up.
Follow on Joan's comment on husband and wife. My husband, I think Winnie knows him. He's a orthopedic surgeon, and we two professionals. Sometimes we talk and we cannot come into agreement every so often. But he is always say that I'm so. Every time he worked late, I worked late, and he came home and then to put down his jacket and said, "I'm so jealous of you." I said, "Why? Because that you're jealous of me." He said, "You work so hard, but then your buildings will stand. But for me, I work equally hard, but my patient will die." I think responding to Nora's comment is that I think we three, and I think Anna and also a number of us in this generation are fortunate, because during our times are difficult. We have to fight. We are born fighters, I think. But today, I think without the Filipino helpers, you see what polyuse like. So I think the teens now, they really have to ask themselves, the society is not there to give everything. They will have to give, they have to fight as well. Talking about this Saunter Club, we have a social WeChat, a WhatsApp group, apart from the formal Saunter group, which is the same group of person, but we can talk about anything we like. And since June, I was bombarded by all this one camp, non-stop. And yesterday, I seldom sent out messages because as professionals, I think it is a political issue. We probably, it has to resolve in the political means. Yesterday, I really cannot then send a message that with this strong force of professional women, I'm sure that we can do something. Whether it is to help the youngsters to early start the university application talks to them, whether we have small groups of sharing the experiences, etc., etc. I'm sure that we as a group can do something rather than just sending messages and shouting and criticizing. And of course, it's unfortunate because they are all on one camp and of course, because the camp is pro one part, that means one cannot. I work in China for 20 years. I know we spend our effort and energy to help build the country, and of course, it is not all equal, and of course the situation is different from one part to another, and they have so many issues to resolve. But it does not mean that Hong Kong will have to give up to that one state requirement, that we all have to give up whatever our freedom, our intentions. So, and after that message, the voices came silent, and someone even sang Koala Bear helped save in the Melbourne fire, like that. That's coming back to being a human being, I think. Yeah.
Well, I definitely think that this kind of today's event that Eunice and Shirley organized is definitely part of that conversation. I thought it was quite funny that this morning Suhanya, I think, actually used the word birthed, that you guys birthed this event, and then Shirley, you said brewed. One being more kind of dramatic, at the other, and maybe immediate. The other one is more kind of slow, which also makes me think about. We talked today a little bit about like mentorship, and I think like I'm curious to know like how we can continue to build that within kind of our work, our practice. In more formal situations like these, but also in more informal ones, because I mean, I think gender is just one form of partitioning. There are lots of different ways, but I think it's important also to not subscribe to stereotypes while, you know, kind of like if I have somebody in my staff who's male or female, I wouldn't necessarily want to expect one is more sensitive than the other. I think I would expect equal sensitivity from both. And I think that's only through our own example, is to not subscribe to those stereotypes.
Right. I don't have so much a question, but maybe to frame reflections, maybe frame issues around it. I do think that just simply taking into account the body of work that's been discussed today, I do feel that they stand in equal, or they stand on its own. So on one hand, I'm given over to the fact that there are structural inequalities in our system. So on one hand, we are tolerant and ever more liberal enough to accommodate everyone, and to say, to Clover's point, we're equally sensitive and so on, but there exist structural issues within our culture, our systems, and so on. So there's one part of me that would suggest that we need to actively overcome it. So affirmative action, having equal opportunities, these are ways, legislative and executive ways, to accelerate this process. But I also feel quite confident that as we share the work, this effervescence is just everywhere. That it's so competitive, it's so compelling. I do feel like we don't have to reaffirm this work. This work is already very powerful. The narratives, the stories. I almost feel like events like this would help us discourse better. That is to be able to discuss this in a much more valid way. To the extent that I almost have a question, maybe to the end, towards this being an account of history. Let's say if history should be rewritten in a sense that if these voices can be captured, quite often is the bad excuse of let's say historians or curators not knowing the work enough, not knowing that with every Rudolph story, with every UIA competition winning entry, with every interest in NGO work and so on, they forgot to mention the other participants, Nora or someone else, that they would have to then put it back on the map. And if we don't talk about it and reveal it, whether it's through the partitioning of gender and so on, it just get lost, and we only hold up the original figure, without which the heroic figure of the architect, forgetting that there are many participants that would add to that story, and there's simply not enough information about it. So to be able to discourse this way just puts everything back on the map to be discussed on its own terms. And I feel like I don't have to reaffirm, but simply that the work is incredibly powerful already. So that's a kind of maybe a kind of reflection. But
And your wife is ready to cut you off.
yes, we're running out of time, right? But I was
Sorry,
I was really curious that Hong Kong is such an open. At least the presentations testify to how incredibly open the society is, and to all kinds of influences. The awareness of this place that you have, I on one hand is such a privileged place, but on the other hand you are such actors in this narrative. Whether there's that awareness that I'm actually in this space that is, in a sense, making history, or if only we could write more about it. Again, create discourse that supplements all the mainstream discourses that we've been teaching our students out there. They just don't have access to this level of information. If only we do, and the question is, how do you feel being in this place, in a sense, a momentous time in history in Hong Kong? It's an incredible privilege, also a kind of powerful position to be in. I do think that I do sense that there's an incredible awareness that there's this position to be in.
Thank you, Kun.
Can I just also just say something? Not burning, but there's something really amazing about all these women here. They're not only just dedicated to craft of architecture, but they're highly politically and socially conscious. And this is something I have completely, I find so much admiration for. And I think this is something we need to learn and teach our students, and also for younger architects to be inspired by. It's really a public intellectual role that I think all of you play, and I think that's very empowering. That's my takeaway from today.
I mean, that's great. Thank you. In fact, Kun, thank you. I think I had prepared, and Shirley, a closing, but I think you guys really touch on it. So you can save us the time. I think it's been an amazing day, and it's exceeded what we thought we are here for. Yes, we're here to talk about women and have conversations about women in the city. I think the incredibly self-consciousness of practice, how you do it, what you do, through the narratives, through the work, is very inspiring. And I think there are many here who are not necessarily on the stage, but equally inspiring. And I think we've been very fortunate to be in the midst here. Unfortunately, we don't have Q&A per se, but we're going to close here, and we invite everyone to hang around maybe for some chats. And thank you, amazing audience. It's a long day, and we hope you appreciate this format of conversations. We want the conversations to not end. And our photographer would like a group photo.